with. Quite unconscious that his master was looking on from the dark corner by the parlour door, Sim threw off the paper cap, sprang from his seat, and in 2 extraordinary steps, something between skating and minuet dancing, bounded to a washing place at the other end of the shop, and there removed from his face and hands all traces of his previous work, practising the same step all the time with the utmost gravity. This done, he drew from some concealed place a little scrap of looking-glass, and with its assistance arranged his hair, and ascertained the exact state of a little carbuncle on his nose. Having now completed his toilet, he placed the fragment of mirror on a low bench, and looked over his shoulder at so much of his legs as could be reflected in that small compass, with the greatest possible complacency and satisfaction. Sim, as he was called in the locksmith's family, or Mr Simon Tappertit, as he called himself, and required all men to style him out of doors, on holidays and Sundays out, was an old-fashioned, thin-faced, sleek-haired, sharp-nosed, small-eyed little fellow, very little more than 5 feet high, and thoroughly convinced in his own mind that he was above the middle size, rather tall, in fact, than otherwise. Of his figure, which was well enough formed, though somewhat of the leanest, he entertained the highest admiration, and with his legs, which, in knee-breeches, were perfect curiosities of littleness, he was enraptured to a degree amounting to enthusiasm. He also had some majestic, shadowy ideas, which had never been quite fathomed by his intimate friends, concerning the power of his eye. Indeed, he had been known to go so far as to boast that he could utterly quell and subdue the haughtiest beauty by a simple process which he termed eyeing her over. But it must be added that neither of this faculty, nor of the power he claimed to have through the same gift of vanquishing and heaving down dumb animals, even in a rabid state, had he ever furnished evidence which could be deemed quite satisfactory and conclusive. It may be inferred from these premises that in the small body of Mr Tappertit there was locked up an ambitious and aspiring soul. As certain liquors, confined in casks too cramped in their dimensions, will ferment and fret and chafe in their imprisonment, so the spiritual essence or soul of Mr Tappertit would sometimes fume within that precious cask, his body, until, with great foam and froth and splutter, it would force a vent and carry all before it. It was his custom to remark, in reference to any one of these occasions, that his soul had got into his head, and in this novel kind of intoxication many scrapes and mishaps befell him, which he had frequently concealed with no small difficulty from his worthy master. Sim Tappertit, among the other fancies upon which his before-mentioned soul was for ever feasting and regaling itself, and which fancies, like the liver of Prometheus, grew as they were fed upon, had a mighty notion of his order, and had been heard by the servant-maid openly expressing his regret that the prentices no longer carried clubs wherewith to mace the citizens. That was his strong expression. He was likewise reported to have said that in former times a stigma had been cast upon the body by the execution of George Barnwell, to which they should not have basely submitted, but should have demanded him of the legislature, temperately at first, then by an appeal to arms if necessary, to be dealt with as they in their wisdom might think fit. These thoughts always led him to consider what a glorious engine the prentices might yet become, if they had but a master spirit at their head, and then he would darkly, and to the terror of his hearers, hint at certain reckless fellows that he knew of, and at a certain lion heart ready to become their captain, who, once afoot, would make the Lord Mayor tremble on his throne. In respect of dress and personal decoration, Sim Tappertit was no less of an adventurous and enterprising character. He had been seen, beyond dispute, to pull off ruffles of the finest quality at the corner of the street on Sunday nights, and to put them carefully in his pocket before returning home. And it was quite notorious that on all great holiday occasions it was his habit to exchange his plain steel knee-buckles for a pair of glittering paste, under cover of a friendly post, planted most conveniently in that same spot. Add to this that he was in years just 20, in his looks much older, and in conceit at least 200. that he had no objection to be jested with touching his admiration of his master's daughter, and had even, when called upon at a certain obscure tavern to pledge the lady whom he honoured with his love, toasted with many winks and leers a fair creature whose Christian name, he said, began with a D. And as much is known of Sim Tappertit, who has by this time followed the locksmith in to breakfast, as is necessary to be known in making his acquaintance. It was a substantial meal, for over and above the ordinary tea equipage, the board creaked beneath the weight of a jolly round of beef, a ham of the first magnitude, and sundry towers of buttered Yorkshire cake, piled slice upon slice in most alluring order. There was also a goodly jug of well-browned clay, fashioned into the form of an old gentleman, not by any means unlike the locksmith, atop of whose bald head was a fine white froth, answering to his wig, indicative, beyond dispute, of sparkling home-brewed ale. But better far than fair home-brewed, or Yorkshire cake, or ham, or beef, or anything to eat or drink that earth or air or water can supply, there sat, presiding over all, the locksmith's rosy daughter, before whose dark eyes even beef grew insignificant, and malt became as nothing. Fathers should never kiss their daughters when young men are by. It's too much. There are bounds to human endurance. So thought Sim Tappertit when Gabriel drew those rosy lips to his, those lips within Sim's reach from day to day, and yet so far off. He had a respect for his master, but he wished the Yorkshire cake might choke him. "Father," said the locksmith's daughter, when this salute was over, and they took their seats at table, "what is this I hear about last night?"
"All true, my dear. True as the gospel, doll."
"Young Mr Chester robbed, and lying wounded in the road when you came up?"
"Ay, Mr Edward, and beside him Barnaby, calling for help with all his might. It was well it happened as it did, for the road's a lonely one, the hour was late, and the night being cold, and poor Barnaby even less sensible than usual from surprise and fright, the young gentleman might have met his death in a very short time."
"I dread to think of it,"
cried his daughter with a shudder.
"Oh, how did you know him?"
"Know him?" returned the locksmith. "I didn't know him. How could I? I have never seen him, often as I had heard and spoken of him. I took him to Mrs Rudge's, and she no sooner saw him than the truth came out."
"Miss Emma, father. If this news should reach her, enlarged upon as it is sure to be, she will go distracted."
"Why, look'ee there again, how a man suffers for being good-natured," said the locksmith. "Miss Emma was with her uncle at the masquerade at Carlisle House, where she had gone, as the people at the Warren told me, sorely against her will. What does your blockhead father, when he and Mrs Rudge have laid their heads together, but goes there when he ought to be abed, makes interest with his friend the doorkeeper, slips him on a mask and domino, and mixes with the maskers."
"And like himself to do so!"
cried the girl, putting her fair arm round his neck and giving him a most enthusiastic kiss.
"Like himself,"
repeated Gabriel, affecting to grumble, but evidently delighted with the part he had taken, and with her praise.
"Very like himself, so your mother said. However, he mingled with the crowd, and prettily worried and badgered he was, I warrant you, with people squeaking, 'Don't you know me?' and 'I found you out,' and all that kind of nonsense in his ears. He might have wandered on till now, but in a little room there was a young lady who had taken off her mask, on account of the place being very warm, and was sitting there alone."
"And that was she?"
said his daughter hastily.
"And that was she," replied the locksmith. "And I no sooner whispered to her what the matter was, as softly, doll, and with nearly as much art as you could have used yourself, and she gives a kind of scream, and faints away."
"What did you